Announced policy of January 9th, 2023. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, for 30 minutes.
I thank the Speaker. Anybody who's watching the world events unfolding today is well aware that our dear friends in Israel are under attack, but they're not just under attack by Hamas. They are in fact under attack from the anti-Western civilization radical progressives across the globe, and in particular at the International Criminal Court. And in all ways, with respect to this attack on Israel, on Western civilization, on our own values, on the abuse of an international organization with no real legitimacy, the International Court, the United States should have Israel's back. Let's look back for a second at October 7th. Let's look at what Israel is dealing with in addition to a long history of being under attack, of facing foes in the Middle East, of having to live in constant fear of attack, of having to live under the technology provided in mutual relationship between the United States and Israel with Iron Dome and with David Sling and with all the technology to shoot missiles down. How many Americans would like to be sitting in Manhattan or in D.C. or in Austin, Texas, or in Dallas or in San Francisco or any other part of this country and be sitting there knowing that the only reason they're safely sitting there is that the missiles that are constantly being fired at them are being taken down by technology? I don't think that would sit too well with most Americans. I don't think most Americans would sit back if rockets were being fired into our nation from Juarez into El Paso. I don't think we'd just sit back and say, oh, that's great, fine, keep firing missiles, we'll just put up a shield and shoot them down. I think we would do something about it, and I think it would be pretty violent. And I think we would be right to do so. Look at October 7th for our friends in Israel. Let's start with the fact that 22 American citizens were killed. Let's add to it that 1,000 Israelis or more were killed. Almost 3,000 injured. 4,500 rockets were fired in from Gaza by Hamas into Israel. 1,300 targets were struck. Not since the Holocaust has this large a number of Jews been killed in a single day. That's the truth. Hamas beheaded at least 40 babies. Let that sink in for a minute. Hamas beheaded at least 40 Israeli babies. Hamas terrorists not only raped and murdered Israeli women, they forced husbands, families, and friends to watch. That happened. We have documentary evidence. We know this occurred. A compilation of those atrocities captured on video shows gunmen shooting the dead bodies of civilians in cars, militants in the process of beheading a body with a hoe, burnt corpses thrown in a dumpster. Eyewitnesses on October 7th, quote, "To be afraid for your kid's life and your wife, it's a whole new level of fearing," a survivor of the attacks in Israel on October 7th said. Quote, "I just waited pretty much that they will come and murder me, my wife and my kids inside our house. I thought maybe if the terrorists enter my house, I would go out so they will kill me and they will leave my family aside." There's another one. "It was the worst horrific war scenes that you see only in movies around us," said another survivor. Another, "The gunfire was nonstop and we're waiting and waiting and it's continuing. You hear the only weapons of Hamas and realize no one is here to save us." Another one, "As a woman who was there, I can say that the fear is endless. It can't be described in words. To be a woman in captivity is to be in constant fear, but the men there also undergo abuse," said one who was abducted during the October 7th attack. There remain today over 100 hostages being held. So now steps in the International Criminal Court, the ICC. When President Trump came into office, he rightfully recognized the threat of the International Criminal Court. The International Court was created under the guise of investigating and prosecuting the world's most serious crimes. but actually represents a significant threat to our nation's sovereignty. In 2020, when President Trump came into office, he issued an executive order punishing by way of sanctions anyone at the ICC that goes after the United States service members, or our allies, such as Israel. What did President Biden do in all of his infinite wisdom? He revoked those sanctions as soon as he got into office, effectively giving the ICC a free pass to target United States citizens and our allies, such as Israel. They made an escalatory and unprecedented step just recently, threatening to issue illegitimate arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu and other Israeli officials for alleged war crimes in Gaza. The application marks the first time the ICC has sought to prosecute a major United States ally or the leader of a democratic country. What you are seeing happen is an unprecedented assault on Western civilization, on Israel, and by extension on our sovereignty as America. Now, I view this court as an illegitimate court. It has no authority over America. Technically, we are a signatory to the court because President Clinton signed on but did not submit it to the Senate for any kind of ratification, so it has no legal force in America. But do you think that the ICC will target Americans? You bet they will. If we don't act right now to quash what is occurring with the ICC targeting the Prime Minister of Israel, think about that. An international court with no real legal authority in the United States is targeting the Prime Minister of Israel for responding with military force to the attacks, rockets, murders, rapes, beheadings levied against the citizens he represents as the Prime Minister, levied against them directly from Hamas. A nation, by the way, Israel, which has taken the unprecedented step in history to give warnings to citizens, civilians in Gaza, up to 2 weeks advance notice. In one case, dropping 15 million leaflets across Gaza to warn them, you need to clear out because we're going to take out these Hamas facilities. Leaving text messages, voicemails, taking every step possible to warn civilians to move away from Hamas targets. This is going to be studied for years to come, what Israel's been doing to keep the civilian to combatant casualty as low as it is. We believe somewhere between 1 and 2. Frankly, well below the norms and the standards the United Nations talks about, well below some of the historic norms even for the United States. This must be stopped because when they're going after the Prime Minister of Israel, they're going to go after us. But even put that aside, we can't stand by and allow an international tribunal to be targeting our ally and friend Israel for simply defending itself against attack. This is why I was proud to join with Representative Mast from Florida, Representative Stefanik from New York, to introduce the Illegitimate Court Counteraction Act to impose sanctions on the ICC officials who seek to go after U.S. citizens or our allies, modeled very similarly to the Trump executive order. Also mirrored in legislation offered by Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas over in the United States Senate. As I've stated, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, is an illegitimate court. It represents a threat to the United States and our sovereignty. Frankly, we should be more aggressive than what we've put in this legislation. But we're seeking to move quickly in a world in which the current administration is at war with Israel while they're trying to contend that they're allies. In 2021, President Biden reportedly ignored a request for a phone call with the Israeli foreign minister. Earlier this month, President Biden threatened to cut off Israelis' military aid while they're fighting a war against Hamas. Now he's actively criticizing Israel's military strategy on the world stage. In a Politico article, top officials are publicly calling Israel's strategy in Gaza self-defeating and likely to open the door to Hamas's return, a level of criticism of the Middle East ally not seen since the war began in October. The Biden administration betrayed Israel and, frankly, our own well-being as a nation when at the United Nations earlier this year, when America abstained from a vote, when the United Nations was calling and demanding for an immediate ceasefire, which would have been a one-sided ceasefire, hamstringing Israel in its defense against Hamas. The United Nations lowered its flag to mourn the recent death of the butcher of Tehran, the president of Iran. The United States Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations, Robert Woods, stood for the moment of silence in honor of the former president of Iran. This is what this administration is doing. They're taking steps directly to undermine Israel. We have never seen this kind of unprecedented undermining of one of, if not our closest ally, at a time when they most need our support. And look, I am not one to believe in blind support. I've in fact voted against funding here because I thought the funding was foolish and misguided because it included funding that would go to Hamas. We voted for, I think, about $15 or $16 billion of aid to Israel, something I generally supported. But it included $9 billion in humanitarian aid, which we knew, based on history, common sense, and experience, would go to Hamas. And in fact, it is. We should not blindly support anybody. We should not just write blank checks. We should not pat ourselves on the back for support. But when you've got an international criminal court that has no legal force in the United States, when you've got an international criminal court threatening to go after the prime minister of our very close, if not closest ally, for defending itself when it's having rockets fired out of itself and against enemies that beheaded 40 of their own babies, I'm sorry. That criminal court needs to be forcefully condemned by the United States. But at the same time, this is all going on. And I hope we will bring forward this legislation forthwith. It is a good bill. It has, I think, 60 co-sponsors and growing with a cross-section ideologically of the conference. I hope we will bring this bill forward when we get back from Memorial Day recess. And I want to compliment the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, for his work in trying to move this bill forward. I want to compliment the Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Michael McCall, for his work in trying to get this forward and working with a broad cross-section of us to get legislation to condemn the International Criminal Court, pass sanctions, force them to understand that if they're going to act against our ally, if they're going to take an unprecedented step of issuing warrants against the Prime Minister for alleged war crimes, that we will sanction them and that they will have no welcome mat in the United States. By sanctioning, we mean that all of the actors involved would not be welcome here, their families would not be welcome here, their visas would be revoked, and other penalties and measures, including any funds that potentially flow from the United States to get to the International Criminal Court, which are not supposed to occur, but often do through these various NGOs, that we would take all the steps we can to undermine an International Criminal Court that has no basis. But while that is going on, remember this. At every stage of the war from October 7th, the regime of Egyptian President al-Sisi has undermined Israel's war effort in a bid to prevent the Jewish state from defeating Hamas. Now, the financial interests of the al-Sisi family appear to have been advanced significantly through cooperation with Hamas efforts to build tunnels across the border with Egypt. Now, how do we know that? Well, in the last 10 days or so, Going back to May 11th, Israel revealed that during the early stages of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces operation in Rafah, now pause for a second. The world geniuses, all of the elites in the world body said, no, Israel can't go into Rafah. They were adamant about it. These are war crimes. You can't go into Rafah. There's, civilians there. Well, Israel's been going into Rafah. They need to root out the battalions there. They need to kill more Hamas. They need to destroy Hamas, leveling it to the ground, minimize civilian casualties, and find every way they can to restore peace and well-being by destroying their enemy. We would want nothing less as Americans, I assure you. Israel revealed that during the early stages of their operation in Rafah, IDF forces discovered more than 50 underground tunnels that traverse the international border between Egypt and Gaza. This story is not getting nearly the attention that it deserves. What is it that the international bodies, what is it that the people and Palestinians in Gaza and the folks associated with Hamas and those that are enemies of Israel, what is it that they didn't want us to know? The scope of the cross-border tunnel project indicates that Egyptian authorities were not merely aware of Hamas's operation, they were supporting it. They were partners. They were making money. All by the way that there's all sorts of existing international agreements dating back to 1979 between Egypt and Israel. How much American money is flowing to Egypt? How much American money is flowing to the very countries and the very entities that are attacking Israel? And here, they didn't want people to go into Rafah. They didn't want Israel to go in. Why? Because they knew that the game was going to be given up. That there is a concerted, coordinated effort throughout the Middle East region to find ways to dismantle, disrupt, attack, and destroy Israel. That's the truth. And this president is effectively supporting it, pulling back on the resources given to Israel, undermining diplomacy, calling for one-sided ceasefires, funding Iran, lifting sanctions on Iran, allowing billions of dollars of their oil money to flow to China, which is enriching Iran and empowering China, undermining our national security, undermining our ally Israel. That's all occurring right now, all while the International Criminal Court is targeting the Prime Minister of Israel. Now look, there's nothing new. Egypt has tried to undermine Israel's military operations in Gaza every step of the way. Egypt has blocked the exit of Gazans from the war zone. Egypt has blocked humanitarian aid from entering Gaza while accusing Israel of genocide at the International Court of Justice. Egypt has threatened to abrogate its peace treaty with Israel and tied the future of the peace to Israel's bowing to pressure not to operate in Rafah. Egypt has undermined hostage talks and waged political warfare against Israel at the United Nations and other international arenas. There is nothing new here except we now know, right in front of us, the new information about Egypt reveals what we've known about the region's attack and assault on Israel. 50 tunnels, and they keep counting them. Bodies of hostages have been found in the tunnels. It's been clear that there's been the movement of weaponry through the tunnels. But this is just more of the same from an administration that is endangering America on the world stage, undermining the safety and security of the American people. A disastrous, radical, progressive Democratic regime in the White House. Basically, all that regime is propping up a president and using him as a puppet to carry out their radical leftist agenda. There has been no accountability for the disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal. There's been no justice for the 13 service members who died there. No accountability for the billions in military equipment left behind. This administration has created the worst border crisis in the history of our nation, endangered our citizens. Authorities in this country apprehended an illegal alien just this week with a van they called a rape dungeon on wheels. They found children's toys inside with condoms and ropes. This is your country. This is happening in your backyard. There are little girls getting sold into this sex trafficking trade while we speak. An illegal alien from Nicaragua was accused of restraining and blindfolding a 12-year-old girl while attempting to sexually assault her. The alien illegally crossed the Texas border in October of 2021 and was released. 80 known or suspected terrorists have been encountered at the southwest border just in fiscal year 24, more than all of those encountered in FY 17 to 21 combined. Meanwhile, we've sent $175 billion for a proxy war in Ukraine. We have no clear strategy and no defined objective, no oversight on spending. This administration is endangering the citizens it is supposed to be taking care of under the Constitution and defending our borders and securing us against enemies, foreign and domestic. That's the truth. There is no defense. If organizations like the ICC, the International Criminal Court, if organizations like the United Nations, if organizations like the World Health Organization and the rest of them actually cared about human rights, they'd be going after the real war criminals. They don't care about Hamas's crimes. Yeah, they say the ICC, they're issuing warrants for Hamas. But they're trying to constrain Israel from going out and attacking and destroying Hamas. What they care about is attacking and tearing down everything that is great and good with Western civilization that has done more for more people around this world than any other civilization in history. And whether the president knows it's going on or not, that's what the Biden administration's actions have all been driving towards these past 3 years. They're destroying our sovereignty and weakening us on the outside while pushing chaos, economic ruin, and moral disintegration domestically. I hope my colleagues will support the ICC sanctions bill. It's important. I hope we'll all support it. But I have to address one other thing, because while I think we'll have unity among Republicans in pushing back on this International Criminal Court that's undermining our sovereignty and targeting our friend and ally Israel, and while I hope that we will be able to speak with one voice when we get back on that subject, there's another thing that's going on consistently here in this town. 18 months ago, some of us set out to change the institution. We set out to change the rules and open up the process and be able to have more amendments, have more voice for the entirety of the majority in the decision-making of the leadership. And for a while, that resulted in some changes. Last year, we were able to get Republican and broad support for what we call the Limit, Save, Grow Act in order to put forward a vision for limiting the increase in debt while expanding fiscal responsibility. It was good legislation. We passed the strongest border security bill that we've ever passed. It had no amnesty in it. It had legitimate border security measures that have been rejected by Democrats, but which would, by any objective measure, secure the border of the United States, and almost assuredly would have meant that the killer who was paroled into the United States by the Biden administration would not have been able to be paroled and would not have been able to kill Laken Riley. We passed that bill. We passed that bill as Republicans, uniting to do that. We passed 7 appropriations bills. We processed about 1,100 amendments. We were able to move the ball forward in order to unite, in order to get this train back on track to see if we could do the appropriations process the right way. But there are many people in this body, particularly among my Republican colleagues, who want to hide behind rules and hide behind votes on rules, taking down rules, to say that we're not actually carrying out regular order. Now, what does that mean for the average citizen out there? There are people in this town who want to have every excuse possible for blowing the budget of the United States, racking up debt, leaving the border wide open, sending more money overseas for endless wars, and then coming to us and crying about how somehow we don't get it. We don't get it, you see. We're supposed to all work as a team and agree to all the rules. Does it matter what's in the rule? What good is unity if your unity is for a terrible and stupid and destructive purpose? What good is unity if unity is going to rack up more debt and destroy our budget, destroy our children's futures, and empower bureaucrats, empower tyrants, take away liberty, leave borders open, allow people to die, empower China, send money to Ukraine? What good are promises to say that you're going to secure the border of the United States before you deal with Ukraine and then do nothing of the sort? What good are rules that carry out that as the result? When you hear a Republican decrying the fact that some of us want to say no and stand athwart history, yelling stop, to quote William F. Buckley, ask them what they've done. Ask them what they've done to limit spending, cut spending, secure the border, do anything they said they would do. Ask them to prove it. Ask them to show their votes. Because nothing is going to change in this town as long as people bow down to the power brokers who tell you how it is. I will again state on the floor of this chamber, I answer to God, the Constitution, and the 750,000 people who sent me here. I answer to no committee chairman. I answer to no speaker. I answer to no colleague. I answer to those Texans I represent and following the law. My election certificate is every bit as valuable as anybody else's here. And if they don't like it and they want to go home and explain why they saddle up with Democrats for more Democrat support and majority Democrat support, and they want to try to explain their votes, go ahead. Explain the kill switches on cars that you voted for. Explain the Republicans who voted against defunding UNRWA last September, 3 weeks before Israel was attacked by people funded by UNRWA. Explain that. The American people sent us here to change this place. I had a colleague just a minute ago in a meeting who was just saying, been here 14 years, and we've done nothing of the things that we set out to do. Amen. We have an obligation as members of this body to actually do the things we said we would do. I believe that the efforts that we set out to do 18 months ago resulted in positive change, and I'm not going to let go of those things. We did manage to hold spending, non-defense spending flat. Defense spending that went up was paid for out of the hide of the IRS expansion and out of COVID money. We passed the best border security bill we could. We set the terms of the fight with a limit, save, grow bill for the defense spending bill. We put caps in place, which have already been busted. We started to push this place in the right direction, and that is the direction we ought to go back to. Over the next 5 or 6 months, the American people are going to have choices to make. I believe that they ought to return a Republican majority in the House and give us a Republican majority in the Senate, and I think they ought to put Donald Trump in the White House. But none of that will matter if Republicans aren't willing to come here and do what we said we would do and put every ounce of your election certificate on the line to do what you said you would do. Because we didn't come here to sit around for 2 years talking about how we get reelected. We came here to save the country. I hope that is what we will focus on doing. And I hope most Americans will sit and watch my friend from Arizona's detailed explanations of where this country is headed if we do not seek not just fiscal responsibility in the broadest sense, but as he will no doubt say in a few minutes, smart ways that we go about doing what we can do to save this country with its mountains of debt piling up for a variety of reasons, all of which are things we could deal with if we just had the courage to do it instead of looking at each other, talking about the next election. Once we get elected, we should do something with it. With that, I will yield back.